Hey YouTube, how's it going? This is Leatherneck Patriot. I decided to go ahead and start a series on emergency preparedness. And what I'd like to focus on is teaching people who are just getting into or are interested in emergency preparedness to kind of give them a baseline of where to start. Now, my first couple of videos are going to be about the academic side of it. You know, what is an emergency? What are the differences between disasters and catastrophes? And we'll go over the cycles of emergency management and emergency preparedness. But as we go along in the videos, we will actually start building a kit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from scratch. And I'm going to build a kit with y'all, so we can slowly build up a kit and be ready for some form of disaster that might come in the future. A little bit about me. Well, I grew up in the Southeast. I grew up in South Carolina on the Atlantic Ocean. And I grew up in Florida on the Gulf of Mexico. That's right, Hurricane Alley. I've been dealing with emergency preparedness for over 20 years now. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, firefighter, emergency management consultant, and an avid outdoorsman. If I'm at the house, chances are I'm out camping or hiking. So, let's get started. What's an emergency? Well, an emergency is any situation or event that threatens or actually causes bodily harm, death, or damage or destruction of property. Very simple definition. So, what's a disaster? Well, a disaster is a large-scale emergency. So you could view, hurricanes, earthquakes, something that's going to affect a lot of people would be considered a disaster. Now you hear a lot of talk about catastrophes and disasters and what's the difference. And this is actually a pretty big topic in the emergency management community. Catastrophe, well, that term is derived from ancient Greece and the Greek tragedies. A catastrophe was a tragic ending, and it's more today used as, a very violent event. And we all know disaster is a large scale emergency. How do those two differ? Well, for the purpose of these videos and the rest of the series, what I'm going to focus on are disasters. And what we're going to view catastrophes as, catastrophes are going to be a disaster where key points of infrastructure fail. And when those key infrastructure points fail, that's critical to society, you then start seeing a catastrophe. And the epitome of this example is Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina saw catastrophic failures in their infrastructure and communications. That disaster quickly became a catastrophe. So for the rest of the series, we'll focus on that's the difference between these two. Now let's get started talking about FEMA and how they categorize, or I should say how they define the emergency management cycle. This is the emergency management cycle as defined by FEMA. It starts off with mitigation. Mitigation is any measurement taken to limit or suppress the impact or effect of an event. Preparedness is just that. It's preparing for the event, ensuring that you have shelter, ensuring that you have food during a disaster. Then the actual disaster hits. Then it comes into response. Now what response is the response phase takes place during and immediately after a disaster. And this involves the community, local, state, and federal governments. And then you step into recovery. And what recovery is just the continuation of response until the normal daily life is resumed. I don't necessarily agree with this cycle. Might be good for, state and local and federal agencies so they can help with their emergency management process, but simple things like preparedness. Me personally, I feel being prepared mitigates the effects of a disaster. So what I've done is I've developed a cycle that I think is geared more towards the individual and how they can prepare for an emergency. So let's go ahead and go to that cycle. This is the cycle I developed. What I try to do is focus on your everyday Joe and Jane and how they're going to go through the emergency preparedness. Let's talk about planning. Planning is just that. It's putting ideas on paper, brainstorming with your friends, family, and neighbors, and trying to come up with a good, solid, but flexible plan in case something does happen. And this doesn't have to be, a hurricane or massive disaster, catastrophe. This could be something simple as, You know, getting into a car accident, that in itself is an emergency. So, and you want to review. You want to periodically review to make sure that the items in your kit are still applicable. Winter rolls around, you need to start throwing some more coats or blankets in there, or summer rolls around, you need to take out that winter stuff. And if you're like me with kids, and you know they grow like weeds, so if you put any clothes or shoes or anything like that in there, you know you're going to have to make sure that they still fit. Moving on to preparedness, and what we want to do is focus more on taking your normal everyday stuff that you have in your house just laying around and putting that into your kit, so it's in one consolidated location in case something happens. So if a blizzard just pops up on you, you know, okay, let's go get the flashlights. Everything's in that kit. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a very elaborate kit. And you don't want to go to a place like someplace like REI or get on Amazon and spend thousands of dollars. Trust me, it can be easy to get that far. But I'll show you an example. Like for a car emergency, you know, if I get into an accident, when I was a firefighter, I kept one of these on me. I got this about 10-12 years ago, and it's a seatbelt cutter, plain and simple. And today, I keep this in the console of my car, and just in case I ever get into an accident, my seatbelt gets stuck, well, I got a way out. You can also keep things like first aid kits or fire extinguishers. You know, something like that is what you want to get into the preparedness. Now, modifications. Okay, so let's say you had something like this. This is my kid's headlamp for camping. Say you had something like this in your emergency kit, and you decided, you know, I don't trust these little things. I want to get something a little bit bigger, or I want my kid to take these camping, so I want to go ahead and throw, you know, a real flashlight in there, a good AA flashlight, something real cheap, but it'll work. So when you add that to your kit, you got to ask yourself, how is this going to integrate into my kit? And that's when we get on to the next step, reconciliation. And that's all reconciliation is making sure that the items you put in there, you know, integrate well together. If I've got a bunch of these little headlamps in there and I don't have any spare batteries, what's the impact going to be on adding these flashlights? You're going to have to throw spare batteries. Can your batteries fit in there? You know, different options you have to weigh. So here we're just going to make sure that your new gear or the gear you've taken out, you know, everything still integrates well together. And we get on to early stage mitigation. And this can be tricky for some people because they don't understand it, but when you go into any disaster and which might threaten your power or your water, you want to have those measurements in place just in case you need to back them up. For example, if you for people who live off of wells, if you lose power, you can't use your well. So when I used to live down south, people I knew, they'd fill their tubs up with water just in case they couldn't use that well water and they needed to flush their toilets. They could, you know, pour water out of the tub into the commode, and now you have the ability to flush it. Backup power, getting a generator. If you plan on using like renewable energy like solar or wind, you know, you can have something small set up just to, you know, so you can turn your stove on. You know, another thing is stockpiling of wood, just in case. For me, you know, charcoal, I got a grill out back, so if I need to boil some water, I can just take it out in the backyard and light up the grill. So stuff like that is the early stage mitigation. Now let's say we actually do get into a disaster, and then we're going to start rolling down here, and this is late stage mitigation. The only time you're really going to see late stage mitigation is if you have warning for something. A lot of this has to do with inclement weather. So if you got a blizzard or a hurricane heading towards you, you know, you can do, an example would be boarding up your windows, picking up your electronics and putting them on your desk, you know, unplugging everything, putting plastic over your electronics. This would be late stage mitigation. So then we go to, and this pretty much, this part of the cycle right here is the same as FEMA. There's no really reason to go into that, but you know, here it is in a nutshell. It's emergency preparedness, and you know, we're not trying to focus on it's the end of the world, oh my God, what am I going to do? No. What we want to focus on, and we take baby steps if you have to, is start off with a 3-day kit. And as time moves on, you slowly acquire stuff. Go ahead and build it up to a 7-day kit. And you know, not everybody's kit requires you to have long-term storage of items so you can be prepared for disaster. That's what the planning's for. You decide how long you want to be prepared for. Also, an important thing, and I'm going to cover this in a separate video, I'm going to go into a lot of detail about evacuation planning. The evacuation planning is something that it needs to have a lot of detail, and you have to have different options available in your evacuation. There are a lot of videos out on the net right now, especially on YouTube, about, okay, crap has hit the fan, we need to get out of Dodge, and they all put their bailout bags or bug out bags together so they can get out of Dodge. So I will cover that a little bit, but that's not the whole purpose of this series. That's only going to be a portion of it, but that's going to be a very important portion to me, because it's going to take a lot for somebody to drive me out of the security and protection of my home. So with that, I hope you learned something. I hope you tune in for future videos. I'm really looking forward to continuing this series, and if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a mail, and we'll see if we can answer some of your questions. And what we'll do is, if you have any questions, I'll get you an answer, and I'll try and address that question in the next video so other people learn from it as well. Feel free to leave comments. Have a good one, YouTube.